The day my wife disappeared, she left behind three things: a half-eaten bowl of oatmeal going cold on the kitchen counter, a crayon drawing our 6-year-old daughter had made for her birthday, and a note, 11 words long, that said she needed space to figure out who she really was. The crayon drawing showed our family of 4 standing in front of our house, stick figures holding hands beneath an enormous yellow sun. Children draw the sun that way when they still believe the world is warm and permanent. I found the drawing propped against the fruit bowl like a small, devastating monument. She had seen it. She had read it. She had walked out anyway. That was 16 months ago. My name is Daniel Marsh. I'm 42 years old, and I work as a structural engineer at a mid-sized firm in Columbus, Ohio. I design bridges. I calculate load tolerances, compression ratios, the invisible forces that hold enormous things together across empty space. I am, by training and by instinct, a man who believes that if you understand the forces in play, structural failure is preventable. I was devastatingly wrong about my own marriage. Claire and I had been together for 12 years, married for 9. We met at a mutual friend's birthday party in our early 30s. She was a freelance graphic designer with dark copper hair and a laugh that arrived half a second before the thing she was laughing at, as though joy was always slightly ahead of her. I fell for that laugh immediately. I interpreted it as vitality. As someone who was genuinely, constitutionally alive in a way that I, methodical, careful, professionally trained in the art of anticipating failure, was not. It didn't occur to me until much later that the quality I loved most about her was also the quality that made her impossible to hold. She was always arriving somewhere. The problem was that, eventually, that somewhere was a place I wasn't invited. We had 2 children. Owen, now 8, dark-eyed and restless, the kind of boy who dismantles things to understand them, and Maisie, 6, quiet and watchful in a way that sometimes made me forget she was a child at all. Maisie collected observations the way other kids collected stickers, storing them away behind those serious gray eyes with a patience that unnerved and amazed me in equal measure. Claire used to say Maisie got that from me. She usually said it with a tone that suggested it wasn't entirely a compliment. We lived in a craftsman bungalow in Clintonville, close enough to Whetstone Park that the kids could bike there on summer evenings while I grilled burgers and Claire poured wine on the back porch, and we talked about nothing important in the comfortable, unhurried way of people who believe they have unlimited time. We went to Owen's soccer games on Saturday mornings. We argued mildly about whose turn it was to call the plumber. We had date nights once a month that had gradually, without either of us deciding, shrunk from dinners at actual restaurants to take out on the couch with the television on. From the outside, we were exactly what we appeared to be: a functional, moderately contented family navigating the beautiful tedium of middle-class suburban life. Inside, the load-bearing walls had already begun to crack. I just hadn't inspected them. The thing about structural failure in real life, not the engineered, controlled kind but the human, intimate kind, is that it rarely announces itself. There is no single fracture point you can point to later and say, "There, that is where it broke." Instead, there is a long, quiet accumulation of hairline stress fractures, each one invisible alone, each one insignificant, until the morning you wake up and the whole thing has come down and you're standing in the rubble trying to understand how you didn't feel the building move beneath your feet. I remember one evening in October, 8 months before she left. The kids were in bed. We were sitting at the kitchen table in the warm overhead light, the dishwasher cycling, the house smelling of the roast chicken we'd had for dinner. Claire was on her laptop, supposedly finishing a client presentation. I was reviewing stress calculations on my tablet. An entirely ordinary evening. I looked up at her across the table. This woman I had built a life with, whose face I knew better than my own, and I noticed something I couldn't name. She wasn't there. Physically, she was present. Close enough that I could see the small scar on her jaw from a childhood bicycle accident she'd described on our 3rd date. But her eyes, the way they moved across the screen, the small involuntary smile that surfaced and dissolved in under a second, it was the expression of someone who had already quietly, in some unlit interior room of themselves, started packing. It was the face of someone thinking about someone else. I told myself I was tired and reading into nothing. I was very good at that. Daniel's retrospective narration reveals the characteristic cognitive pattern of betrayal survivors. The mind, once the truth is known, reconstructs memory into a warning system that was always functioning but never heeded. His professional identity as a structural engineer operates as the story's foundational psychological metaphor. A man trained to detect invisible stress in physical systems applied no equivalent rigor to his most intimate structure. This is textbook compartmentalization. We deploy our most sophisticated analytical tools in domains where competence feels safe, while choosing deliberate simplicity in domains where truth is too costly to examine. The irony is not lost on Daniel himself. It's the source of his deepest shame. More revealing is his original reading of Claire. He fell in love with her restlessness, misidentifying it as joy. Psychologically, this is a pattern of projection. We love in others the qualities we perceive ourselves to lack, rarely examining whether those qualities are genuinely life-sustaining or merely exciting. Daniel needed Claire's movement to feel alive by proximity. Claire needed something Daniel couldn't provide: permission to keep moving without consequence. The crayon drawing abandoned on the counter is the story's moral epicenter. Claire saw evidence of her children's love and left anyway, not because she didn't feel it, but because she had already constructed an internal narrative in which her departure was survivable, even necessary. That self-deception is the real subject of everything that follows. November arrived the way it always does in Ohio. Overnight, without negotiation, stripping the trees bare before you've had time to notice the leaves were changing. There's a particular quality to the light in central Ohio in November, gray and flat and somehow compressing, like the sky has lowered itself to just above the rooftops. I've never loved November. That year, I came to associate it with a specific texture of unease I couldn't locate or name. Claire had started attending yoga classes in September, which was not unusual in itself. She moved through fitness phases the way some people move through books, total immersion followed by abrupt abandonment. There had been a Pilates period 3 years earlier, a spin class phase that lasted 1 summer, a brief and intense relationship with barre that ended without explanation after 6 weeks. The yoga studio was called Solstice, a converted Victorian on High Street with hardwood floors and amber lighting, and the kind of careful, curated serenity that costs $140 a month. She went Tuesdays and Thursdays, from 7 to 8:30 in the evening. I drove her once, in October, when her car was in for an oil change. I waited in the parking lot after she went inside, engine idling, watching through the large front windows as she crossed the studio floor. The way she moved through that space was different from the way she moved through our house. Lighter, more deliberate, like someone who knew exactly where they were going and was glad to be going there. I drove home thinking nothing specific. I filed the observation somewhere below conscious attention and forgot about it. Owen had begun acting out at school around this time, which provided a more immediate and legible concern than my shapeless domestic unease. His teacher, Mrs. Petrov, a precise, measured woman who treated her words like a limited resource, called me on a Thursday afternoon in November to report that Owen had been disruptive during group work and had told another child, with some heat, that her opinion was stupid. "He seems preoccupied," Mrs. Petrov said carefully, "distracted in a way that's become consistent. He's not connecting with his peers the way he was in the fall." When I brought it up with Claire that evening, she listened with her chin propped in her hand, nodding at appropriate intervals. She said she'd talked to him. 3 days later, I asked whether she had. She said yes, that it had been a good conversation, that he was just processing some feelings about the new school year. When I suggested maybe we should see a family counselor just to check in, she shook her head with what I now recognize as practiced dismissal. "We don't need to pathologize a rough patch," she said. "He's 8. 8-year-olds have rough patches. I let it go. I regret that." The phone behavior was the thing I noticed most and resisted examining longest. Claire had always been a moderately phone-attached person. She used it for client communications, for the family group text, for the Instagram account she maintained with intermittent enthusiasm. But through November and into December, the phone became something different. It was always face down on the table when she wasn't actively using it. She brought it to the bathroom when she showered. When a notification buzzed during dinner, her hand moved toward it with a reflexive speed she then visibly controlled. She'd pull the hand back, resume eating, but not before I saw the motion. Once, in early December, I came downstairs at 11:30 at night for a glass of water and found her on the couch. Phone lit in the dark, typing with both thumbs. She heard me on the stairs and the phone went screen down in her lap with a motion so practiced it couldn't have been the first time. "Can't sleep," I said. "Client in Vancouver," she said. "Time zones." She named a client I knew she had, a small branding agency. It was a perfect answer. Not just plausible, but specifically, frictionlessly plausible, the kind of answer you have pre-built and waiting. I went to bed. I lay there for 40 minutes not sleeping, staring at the ceiling, constructing and dismantling explanations. My best friend, Marcus, noticed something I missed entirely. We played squash on Sunday mornings, a habit we'd maintained for 7 years, the kind of male friendship that expresses itself through physical competition and carefully modulated disclosure. In December, toweling off after a game in the locker room, Marcus said, without quite looking at me, "You and Claire good?" "Fine," I said. "Why?" He hesitated in the specific way Marcus hesitated when he'd decided to say something and was reconsidering the decision. "Ran into her at Starbucks on Wednesday. She was with someone. Guy I didn't recognize. Didn't look like a work thing." "What do you mean, didn't look like a work thing?" "Just the body language. Probably nothing." He tied his shoes with unnecessary focus. "Forget I said it." I tried. I genuinely tried. I told myself Marcus had misread a client meeting. I told myself he was projecting. He'd had a rough divorce 2 years earlier and had developed a hair trigger for relationship dysfunction. I built a very reasonable, very detailed argument for why this meant nothing, and I presented it to myself with the confidence of a man who has confused sophistication with denial. But that evening, when Claire mentioned in passing that she'd worked from home Wednesday and hadn't gone out until school pickup, I felt something cold and small settle beneath my sternum. Not certainty. Not even suspicion exactly. Something more like the first faint reading on a seismograph. A tremor too small to call an earthquake, too specific to dismiss entirely. I didn't say anything. The thought of being wrong felt safer than the thought of being right. Christmas came. We decorated the tree together. The 4 of us, Owen and Maisie, fighting over the ornament placement with the gleeful theatricality of children who know they're performing delight for the adults watching. Claire made mulled wine. I put on a Vince Guaraldi record. Maisie fell asleep on the couch at 9 o'clock with tinsel in her hair, and Claire and I sat in the soft tree light after the kids were in bed. And for an hour or so the apartment was so warm and complete that I convinced myself I had invented the cold thing under my sternum. Then her phone lit up on the coffee table. Face up this time, she'd forgotten, and I saw the name before she grabbed it. Ethan. Just a name. People named Ethan existed. She could know 100 people named Ethan. I watched her face as she read the message, the private small thing that happened in her expression before she controlled it, and I thought, I do not know a single thing about anyone named Ethan. She set the phone down and smiled at me and said, "Work stuff," and I smiled back. And we sat in the Christmas tree light while something between us quietly, irreversibly changed. This section illustrates the psychological phenomenon of selective attention. Specifically, the way the mind in a state of emotional threat will simultaneously perceive danger and manufacture reasons to dismiss it. Daniel is not oblivious. He is performing deliberate not knowing. Each red flag is received, filed, and immediately recontextualized into something survivable. The late-night texting becomes time zone business, Marcus's observation becomes projection, the name Ethan becomes ambient noise. This is not stupidity. It is a sophisticated emotional defense mechanism. The cost of knowing the truth is so enormous. The marriage, the family structure, the children's daily reality, his own identity as a husband, that the mind negotiates aggressively for any alternative explanation. What makes Daniel's situation particularly painful is the double displacement. While he is losing his wife, he is also, in practice, losing his son. Owen's behavioral deterioration at school is not incidental. Children are the emotional barometers of homes, and Owen is registering in his body and behavior attention the adults around him refuse to name. Maisie's stillness is the same registration in a different temperament. She watches, she waits, she accumulates data. Both children are responding to a truth their father has not yet permitted himself to see. The Christmas scene is constructed with almost cruel precision, warmth, closeness, the illusion of intact family, punctured by a single name on a glowing screen. The name Ethan arrives not as evidence but as a question Daniel cannot yet bring himself to ask. January was when I stopped being able to not look. It happened the way thresholds often do, not through a single dramatic moment but through the accumulation of small, individually dismissible anomalies reaching a collective mass that the mind can no longer metabolize as coincidence. The name Ethan had planted something in me. I hadn't watered it intentionally, but suspicion, once seeded, doesn't require tending. Claire began going to yoga 3 times a week instead of 2 in January, adding a Saturday morning session. She framed it as a New Year's intention. More movement, more space for herself, which were phrases she used with a frequency that started to feel deliberate. "I just need more space to breathe," she said one evening, and I remember the specific sensation of those words landing, the way my chest contracted slightly around them. I said I understood. I believed that I was being a good husband by saying I understood. The mileage on her car told a different story. I noticed it accidentally, initially. The oil change light came on in late January and I pulled the car into the garage on a Sunday afternoon, checking the dipstick, glancing at the odometer out of habit, the same instinct that makes me note load ratings on the bridges I drive over. According to her account, the previous month had involved work, yoga 3 times weekly, school pickups, the grocery store, 1 visit to her friend Rachel's house on the east side. Columbus is not a large city. The math didn't hold. There were roughly 200 more miles than the stated schedule produced. Not 400, not 1,000, a careful, moderate excess. The kind of discrepancy that could be explained by extra errands, by detours, by any number of innocuous variations. Or it could be explained by trips she wasn't mentioning. I stood in the garage with my hands smelling of motor oil and felt the seismograph needle move more definitively. I called Rachel in early February under the pretense of confirming the date of a dinner party Rachel had allegedly invited us to. A dinner party I manufactured on the spot, banking on Rachel's social calendar being full enough to make confusion plausible. Rachel, warm and slightly chaotic, said she didn't think she'd mentioned a dinner party. Had she? And then, carefully, "I haven't actually seen Claire since November. Is everything okay?" I said of course it must have been a miscommunication. Sorry to bother her. I hung up and sat with the phone in my hand for a long time. The visit to Rachel's house in November, the one Claire had mentioned specifically, with a detail I now recalled. Rachel's making that lemon pasta you like. I told her we'd have her over in return. Had not occurred. A fabricated evening. An invented dinner. A lie specific enough that it had a menu. I began paying attention to her schedule with the methodical care I applied to structural assessments, which is to say, systematically, without emotion, noting everything. The Tuesday yoga class that should have ended at 8:30. She arrived home at 9:40, saying the instructor had run long and a group had gone for tea after. The Thursday class that she'd texted to say was canceled, though when I checked the studio's Instagram later that evening, they had posted a class photo from that exact time slot. She was not in the photo. That meant nothing conclusively, not everyone was in the photo. But the accumulation of small inconsistencies was building into a structure of its own, load-bearing in its totality even if each individual beam seemed fragile. And then there was the overnight conference. In February, Claire mentioned that she had a branding conference in Cleveland, 2 days, a hotel, professional development. She showed me the conference website, which was real. She showed me the registration confirmation, which appeared genuine. She packed a bag on a Thursday morning, kissed me and the kids, and drove north toward the interstate. I worked that Friday in a state of distracted unease. At 3 in the afternoon, I did something I had never done in 11 years. I called her hotel to leave a message, using the name of the hotel she'd mentioned. The front desk checked and told me, politely, that they didn't have a reservation under Claire Marsh. I asked if she might be registered under a different name. The clerk checked again. No. I put the phone down. My office was on the 14th floor. Outside my window, the January gray skeleton of a bridge we were working on stretched over the Scioto River. All exposed steel and engineered promise. I stared at it for a while. I thought about load tolerances. I thought about the point at which a structure has been compromised beyond repair, the point at which the engineer's job shifts from reinforcement to evacuation. She came home Friday evening flushed from the cold, carrying a conference tote bag she had clearly obtained from somewhere, full of the glossy branded detritus of professional events. Lanyards, a water bottle, printed schedules. She talked about the keynote, about a panel on visual identity that had been particularly energizing. She had done her research. The conference had been real, the speakers had been real. She had built a meticulous replica of an experience she had not had. I said very little. I helped Owen with his reading, gave Maisie a bath, went to bed at 10 and lay in the dark listening to Claire brush her teeth in the adjacent bathroom. The ordinary sound of her preparing for sleep, the absolute domestic normalcy of it, and felt something tear quietly inside my chest. Not rage, not yet. Something more like grief. The grief of understanding that the person in the next room is a stranger performing familiarity. My brother-in-law, Tom, Claire's younger brother, whom I'd always liked more than Claire seemed to, called me out of nowhere in mid-February. We weren't close enough for casual calls. He asked how things were going, in the specific overly casual tone of someone who has been elected spokesperson for information they're not sure how to deliver. I asked him directly, was there something he wanted to say? A long pause. Then, she mentioned someone to my mom, a few months ago. I don't know more than that. I just thought. I don't know what I thought. Sorry, Dan. He hung up, and I sat in my car in the parking garage beneath my office building for 20 minutes, engine running, hands on the wheel, going nowhere. At this stage operates as a masterclass in the mechanics of self-deception. Not Daniel's this time, but Claire's. What's psychologically striking about Claire's behavior in this section is its sophistication. The fabricated conference, the populated tote bag, the rehearsed account of panels and keynotes. This is not impulsive concealment but elaborately maintained parallel reality. Psychologists studying infidelity consistently note that the construction and maintenance of a secret life requires enormous cognitive and emotional labor, a labor that further depletes the resources available for the primary relationship. The double life becomes self-sustaining and self-isolating. The more energy invested in concealment, the more the deceiver must emotionally disengage from the deceived, which in turn makes concealment feel more necessary and the affair more emotionally essential. Daniel's investigative turn, checking mileage, calling hotels, fabricating social plans to test her alibi, represents a painful pivot in his self-concept. He is no longer a trusting husband. He is a man who has been forced to become his own investigator. This shift carries its own psychological cost. It requires him to retroactively audit 11 years of memory, asking at every point whether what he experienced as real was being curated. Tom's call is significant not just as evidence but as a social context clue. Claire had mentioned someone to her mother months earlier. This means the affair predates Daniel's suspicions by an indeterminate period. The deception has a history longer than he knows, and the family around them has been sitting with partial knowledge, choosing collective silence over individual honesty. I want to be precise about the moral weight of what I did next, because I've spent 16 months examining it and I don't want to clean it up for the telling. I began monitoring my wife. I am not proud of this. I am also not ashamed of it. I was a man attempting to get accurate information about a structural crisis in the load-bearing framework of his children's lives. I needed to know what I was dealing with before I decided how to deal with it. That's how I framed it to myself in the analytical language I use for everything, because the analytical language was the only thing keeping me functional. The first thing I did was check our shared cloud account. We'd set up a family iCloud years ago for photo sharing between our devices, the accumulated visual record of our life together. I had never had cause to look at it carefully before. I looked now. The photo library was organized by date. I went back to September, the month the yoga classes started, and I began looking not at the photos she'd shared to the family album, which were the expected curation of family life. The kids at the park, Owen's first soccer game of the season, a dinner with my parents in October. I was looking at the metadata, the timestamps, the location tags. Most photos from Thursday evenings in October and November were tagged at or near the Solstice Yoga Studio on High Street. But 4 of them, 4 specific Thursday evenings across the fall, were tagged at a location 6 miles east, near the Short North Arts District. Not the studio, not any restaurant or venue I recognized. A residential address I cross-checked on Google Maps. A mid-century brick apartment building on Hamlet Street, 3 stories, well-maintained, the kind of building that housed young professionals and graduate students and people in transitional phases of their lives. I sat with this information for 3 days before I did the thing I knew I was going to do regardless, which was drive to the building. I went on a Saturday afternoon in late February while Claire had taken the kids to her mother's for lunch. A regular event, predictable in its scheduling, which gave me 4 hours. I parked across the street and did nothing dramatic. I didn't knock on doors. I simply sat in my car and watched the building the way I watch construction sites, looking for information, reading the visible evidence of what was going on inside. After 40 minutes, a man came out. He was approximately my age, maybe a year or 2 younger. Tall, with the lean build of someone who moves through the world easily. The effortless physical confidence of a man who has never had to negotiate much with his own body. Dark hair, good coat, carrying reusable grocery bags, the whole assembled tableau of a reasonable, attractive adult life. He was, from a distance, not extraordinary in any specific way except for the fact that he was walking out of the building where my wife's phone had been on 4 separate evenings. I didn't confront him. I didn't follow him. I photographed him from my car with the practiced calm of a man who was functioning purely on procedural autopilot because the emotional system had temporarily gone offline. I ran his face through nothing because I am not a private investigator and I don't have those tools. But I noticed his car, a navy blue Subaru, Ohio plates, and I noted the plate number in my phone with the same flat efficiency I use when I log structural anomalies in my inspection reports. Marcus found him for me in 48 hours without being told exactly what I needed or why. I called him and said I needed to identify someone, gave him the plate number, and Marcus, who knew people in ways I never had in the casually networked way of extroverts, came back with a name and employer by Monday evening. Ethan Carr, 38 years old. User experience designer at a tech startup headquartered downtown. Not from Columbus originally. He'd moved here 18 months ago from Portland. Portland. Claire's sister lived in Portland. Claire had visited her sister twice in the past year and a half. The connection hit me like a load calculation suddenly resolving, all the variables snapping into a coherent structure. She hadn't met Ethan here. She'd met him there on one of those Portland trips, and he had followed the opportunity to Columbus. Or she had arranged it. I didn't know which yet, and in some ways it didn't matter. What mattered was the scale of it. 18 months. The geography of it suggested 18 months of architecture, of building something in parallel with me, with our children, with the Craftsman bungalow and the Saturday soccer games and the Christmas tree lights. I threw up in the bathroom of my office on the day Marcus gave me the name. I ran cold water and gripped the edge of the sink and looked at myself in the mirror for a long time. The face I looked at was the face of a man who now knew the load had exceeded the tolerance. The question was whether the structure could be reinforced or whether the engineer's job was now something else entirely. There was one more thing I discovered, and it was the thing that broke the remaining ground from beneath me. My mother-in-law, Patricia, a sharp, decent woman who had always been warmer to me than her daughter was sometimes comfortable with, called me one afternoon while Claire was at yoga. We made small talk. Then she said something she may not have intended to say, in the way that the elderly sometimes speak truths they've been sitting with too long. Daniel, has Claire seemed like herself to you? I've been worried. She seems like someone who's made a decision and is just waiting to announce it. I asked what she meant. She's given things away, Patricia said slowly. Things she loved. That painting she had from college. The armchair from her old apartment. I thought she was just decluttering. Now I wonder. She was clearing the house she was already planning to leave. Removing herself from the physical space of our life in increments, the way you don't notice a room getting darker until you realize the light has been off for some time. While I had been collecting evidence, she had already been executing the end of our marriage with quiet, logistical thoroughness. The note she left read, "I'm so sorry. I need to find out who I am outside of all of this. I hope someday you can forgive me." 11 words of apology. 11 words for 9 years of marriage, 2 children. A life assembled from thousands of ordinary days. She left on a Tuesday morning in April, after the kids were at school. When I got home from work at 5:47, the house was physically identical to the one I'd left that morning. except that half the closet was empty, the painting from the bedroom wall was gone, and a crayon drawing of our family was propped against the fruit bowl with the patient precision of something placed with great care. She had already called her lawyer 2 weeks before she left. I know this because the notification arrived in a shared email account. We'd set up for household admin and she'd forgotten to unlink it from the joint inbox. She had been planning this while I was still assembling the evidence of whether it was happening. This section is a study in the terrible geometry of parallel timelines. While Daniel is carefully building a case, Claire is building an exit. They are moving in completely opposite directions within the same physical space. An experienced psychologists describe as emotional uncoupling, the interior dissolution of a relationship long before its external acknowledgement. What is most psychologically revealing here is the methodical nature of Claire's departure preparation. She donated beloved possessions, pre-engaged a lawyer, maintained domestic routine for the children, all while composing an internal narrative of liberation. This is a hallmark of what attachment theorists call avoidant detachment. The withdrawing partner systematically deconstructs emotional ties in private before severing them publicly, creating a clean rupture that feels sudden and catastrophic to the abandoned partner but has been long processed by the one leaving. The revelation of the Portland connection, Ethan arriving in Columbus after meeting Claire on her sister visits, reframes the geography of their deception and raises a devastating question about complicity. Did Claire's sister know? The apartment on Hamlet Street, the photo metadata, the plate number. Daniel has constructed a meticulous case for something he already knew emotionally weeks before the evidence arrived. This is worth noting. The evidence did not produce the knowledge. Confirmed it. The knowledge came from that single name on a phone screen at Christmas. Everything since has been Daniel managing the distance between what he felt and what he could prove, a distance that says much about how men in particular are conditioned to require objective verification before permitting emotional reality. I did not confront Claire before she left. People find this difficult to understand, and I have spent months examining it myself, looking for the cowardice or denial in it, because surely a man who had assembled that much evidence would have said something before his wife walked out. But the truth is more complicated and, I think, more honest than simple avoidance. I knew by mid-March. I had the name, the address, the mileage, the fabricated conference, Tom's call, Patricia's observation, the Portland timeline. I had enough, and I made a deliberate choice to wait, not because I was afraid of the confrontation, though I was, in the way any person is afraid of a moment that will irrevocably change their children's lives, but because I needed to know who I was dealing with before I sat across the table from her. I needed to understand whether there was anything left in her to reach, or whether I would be confronting someone who had already, completely, left. I got my answer on the last Saturday of March, and it arrived through Maisie. We were at the breakfast table, the four of us, a rare Saturday morning with no soccer, no commitments, nowhere to be. I was making pancakes. Owen was watching something on his tablet. Claire was on her phone, face arranged in the neutral expression she wore when she was somewhere else entirely. And Maisie, who had been eating her pancakes with her usual focused seriousness, looked up and said, without inflection or particular emphasis, "Mama, is that your friend Ethan?" The room became very still. Claire's face performed something I had never seen before. The complete and total collapse of a maintained structure, like watching a bridge fail in real time. In the quarter second before she reassembled her expression into something controlled, I saw everything. The guilt, the exposure, the terror, and beneath all of it, like a specific light source, relief. She said, quietly, "What, baby?" "Your phone," Maisie said. "I saw the name. You talked about Ethan when you were on the phone last week. You thought I was asleep." Owen looked up from his tablet with animal alertness, reading the adult weather with the instinct children develop in stressed households. I turned off the stove. I said, in a voice I did not recognize as entirely mine, "Owen, take your sister to your room for a little while. Put on something they want to watch. I'll make more pancakes in a bit." Owen looked at me. He is 8, but there are moments when he looks about 40. He took Maisie's hand and they went upstairs, and I heard their footsteps overhead, and then a cartoon starting. I sat down across from Claire at the kitchen table. She was looking at her hands. I let the silence run. I am, professionally, someone who understands that silence creates pressure, that things held in an enclosed space accumulate force. Finally, she said, I was going to tell you. When? Soon. I had a plan. You had a lawyer, I said. 2 weeks ago. You retained a divorce attorney before you told me anything was wrong. She looked up. Something crossed her face. Not quite shame or not only shame. Something more complex. The look of a person confronting the specificity of their own choices. How do you know that? She asked. The joint email account, I said. The one for household things. You forgot you were still linked to it. She closed her eyes. His name is Ethan Carr, I said. He lives on Hamlet Street. He moved to Columbus from Portland 18 months ago. You met him when you visited your sister. You've been going to his apartment on Tuesday and Thursday evenings. The conference in Cleveland in February did not happen. She said nothing. I could hear the cartoon from upstairs. Something bright and musical. The sound of the world children are supposed to inhabit. I need to understand, I said. Not for the marriage. I think we're probably past that conversation. I need to understand for them. I gestured at the ceiling, toward the sound above us. Because they are going to need an explanation that I cannot provide alone, and I need to know what you're actually choosing before I can figure out how to protect them from how you're choosing it. She was quiet for a long time. Then she said, in a voice I can only describe as genuinely diminished, stripped of all the performance that had been holding the last months together. I love him, Daniel. I know how that sounds. I know what it means. I've been trying not to for a long time and I can't stop. Did you try? I said. Before it started. Did you come to me and say, I'm unhappy? Something is missing? I'm afraid of what I'm feeling? Did you give me a chance? She looked at me and I saw the answer in her face before she spoke it. No, she said softly. I didn't. Why? A longer pause. Then, because I didn't want to be talked out of it. That sentence entered me like a needle entering a very specific point. Not because of the infidelity, not entirely, but because of the clarity of it. She hadn't wanted a conversation. She hadn't wanted the marriage repaired. She had wanted the door, and she had opened it before she told me we were standing in a burning building. I asked about the children. I asked directly, with no softness, what her plan was for Owen and Maisie. She said she wanted to co-parent, that she wanted shared custody, that she wasn't abandoning them. She said the word abandoning with a flinch, as though she'd anticipated it might be used against her and was trying to defuse it preemptively. Then don't leave, I said. Or don't leave the way you're planning to. Don't disappear. Don't let the first time they understand what's happened be the morning they wake up and your side of the closet is empty. She said she needed to do it the way she'd planned because she couldn't get through it any other way. That, I think, was the most honest thing she said in the whole conversation. She needed to do it in a way that protected her capacity to function through it, even if that way was devastating to everyone else. She left 3 weeks later on a Tuesday morning in late April, after the kids were at school. When Maisie got home that afternoon and realized her mother was gone. Not gone for the evening, gone in the dense, permanent way that children sense before they can articulate. She sat down on the kitchen floor with her back against the refrigerator and said nothing for a very long time. When I sat down beside her, she leaned against my arm with her full weight and said, finally, she took the painting. Not she left. Not where did she go. She took the painting. Maisie, 6 years old, understood what mattered. She'd watched her mother remove herself from the house in increments and she had registered every increment, the way she registered everything, and what she said was, she took the painting. The thing that was loved. The thing that was hers. Owen didn't speak for 2 days. Then he asked me if it was because of something he'd done. I held him and told him no with a ferocity that surprised us both. The confrontation scene is structurally devastating precisely because of what it isn't. It contains no screaming, no dramatic accusation, no operatic collapse. Instead, it is conducted with the terrible quietness of two people who have been speaking different languages for a long time and have finally, by necessity, found a shared vocabulary of bare fact. Daniel's choice to wait, to gather not just evidence but understanding before confronting her, is psychologically significant. It speaks to a distinction between the need for justice and the need for knowledge. He was not building a case for a fight. He was trying to understand the nature of what he had lost before he lost it officially. Claire's admission that she didn't want to be talked out of it is the story's psychological apex. It reveals that the betrayal was not the result of a relationship in crisis seeking rescue. It was the result of a decision already made, a desire already chosen, that the marriage was simply in the way of. This is the distinction between an affair born of desperation and an affair born of desire. The former could theoretically be addressed within a marriage. The latter cannot, because the marriage itself is what must be removed. Most harrowing is the children's grief expressed in sideways language. Maisie noting the painting, Owen's 2-day silence, then the shattering question about whether he caused it. Children do not grieve in straight lines. They grieve in displacement, in objects, in self-blame. Both responses are textbook manifestations of abandonment anxiety in children. The attempt to make sense of a senseless rupture by locating it within the self, where it can at least be controlled. 16 months later, I am sitting at the same kitchen table where the confrontation happened, drinking the same brand of coffee we've always bought, in a house that is recognizably the same house and entirely different from it. The overhead light is warm. The dishwasher is running. Outside, it is a Saturday morning in August, and Owen is in the backyard with the garden hose and Maisie is drawing at the table beside me. Not a family of 4 holding hands this time, but a careful, detailed drawing of our dog, a rescue beagle named Gordon we got in May, 6 weeks after Claire left, because Owen said he wanted something in the house that was just ours. Gordon is currently asleep on the tile by the back door, twitching through a dream. Let me tell you what happened in the 16 months between Claire leaving and this August morning, because the story doesn't end in the rubble of April. Stories that end in rubble are incomplete. Claire moved in with Ethan immediately, not to his apartment on Hamlet Street. They rented a house in Bexley together within a month of her leaving, as though the move had been planned in advance, which I now understand it had been. The house was 15 minutes from ours. We had agreed on joint physical custody, the children with me Sunday through Thursday, with Claire Friday and Saturday. In practice, the early weeks were turbulent. Owen refused to go for 3 consecutive weekends, sitting on the stairs in his soccer cleats and saying he wasn't going and I was not going to force him. Maisie went because Maisie processes things by moving toward them rather than away. But she came home each Sunday quieter than she'd left. My attorney was a woman named Helen Graves, who had the bearing of someone who had sat across from devastated people for 20 years and had developed an absolute commitment to clarity as a form of care. She told me, in our first meeting, that the most important thing I could do in the next 6 months was not to win the divorce but to preserve my children's experience of having 2 parents who were capable of functioning. They don't need you to be happy, she said. They need you to be stable and honest. Those are different things. I wrote that down on the legal pad in front of me and looked at it for a long time. The divorce was finalized in November. Claire and I divided things with a fairness that surprised both our attorneys and, I think, ourselves. She kept certain items of sentimental value. I kept the house. We split financial assets without litigation. We were not friendly during this process, but we were civil, with the particular civility of 2 people who understand that their children are the ongoing joint project that supersedes every grievance. I started therapy in May, 2 weeks after Claire left. Not because I believed I needed to process the marriage, but because I understood, with the engineer's pragmatism, that I was going to be the primary parent for 5 days of every week and I needed to be structurally sound. My therapist is named Richard, and he has a habit of waiting until I've delivered a fully constructed, logically organized account of my emotions and then asking, "And what did you actually feel?" The distinction between constructing an account and feeling a thing has been the central work of the past year. What I felt, in the weeks after Claire left, was rage. I want to be honest about that because I think the narrative of the mature, composed wrong party is often a performance, and this story has had enough performance. I was enraged at the systematic lying, at the fabricated conference and the face-down phone and the hollow Christmas tree evening, at the fact that she had retained a lawyer before she had said a word to me, at the terrible specificity of her cruelty, which was not directed cruelty but the almost worse category of cruelty that is indifferent. She wasn't trying to hurt me. I simply wasn't her primary concern. Beneath the rage was grief. And beneath the grief was something I am still working on. which is the examination of my own contribution to a marriage that had grown so empty in its center that one of us could occupy a completely parallel life without the other noticing for months. I don't assign myself equal responsibility for the infidelity. That was her choice, unilateral and clear. But I am capable of asking, honestly, was I present? Did I look up from the structural calculations often enough? Did I ask her what she needed in a way that expected a real answer rather than reassurance? I don't have clean conclusions to these questions. I have ongoing inquiry. Marcus, who started coming around more frequently after Claire left in the quiet way of good friends who don't announce their support but simply remain in the vicinity, told me in August that Ethan and Claire had gotten engaged. I sat with that news for about 48 hours, turning it over, examining my reaction the way you examine an object you found to determine whether it's damaged or simply different from what you expected. What I found, at the end of those 48 hours, was not what I'd expected to find. I was not devastated. I was something more complicated. A mixture of residual grief, a species of relief, and an emotion I eventually identified as clarity. She was not coming back. She had never been planning to come back. The engagement confirmed not a future that excluded me but a past that I could now stop examining for evidence of something other than what it had been. Owen asked me on a Thursday evening in September whether I was angry at his mom. I thought about this carefully before I answered. He was sitting on his bed in his soccer jersey, still sweaty from practice, looking at me with that 40-year-old in an 8-year-old face. I was angry, I said, for a while. I'm not really angry anymore. What are you now? I'm figuring that out, I said. But I'm okay. I'm really okay, actually. He looked at me for a long moment with the evaluating patience of someone taking a careful measurement. Then he nodded once, in the decisive way he has, and said, "Gordon needs a walk." So we walked Gordon. It was a Thursday evening in late September, the air carrying the specific smell of autumn leaves and cool asphalt and distant wood smoke, and Owen walked beside me with his hands in his hoodie pockets, and Maisie held Gordon's leash on the other side, and my dog investigated every lamppost with solemn dedication, and it was ordinary in the most exact sense of the word. Unremarkably, solidly, beautifully ordinary, and I thought about bridges. The thing about a bridge that has failed is that you don't leave the river uncrossed. You study the failure. You understand the forces that produced it. You build something new that accounts for what the previous structure didn't. You build it differently with better knowledge, with the specific calibrations that come only from having calculated a collapse. I am 42 years old. I have 2 children who are growing with the remarkable, indifferent resilience of living things in difficult conditions, not unmarked by what happened but also not defined by it. I have a beagle who dreams and a kitchen table where the light is warm and a job that requires me to think carefully about what holds things together. I have, slowly and not without difficulty, begun to understand that the person I am on the other side of this year is not a diminished version of who I was before. He is someone who has been tested under load and held. Claire and I spoke on the phone last month about Owen's school schedule for the fall. The conversation was 22 minutes long and completely functional. At the end, after we'd sorted the logistics, there was a brief pause, and she said, "Are you doing okay? Really?" And I said, "Yes, really. I meant it." I think she knew I meant it. Whatever she felt about that, I don't know. That is no longer mine to measure. The bridges I build will carry people across distances they can't cross any other way. The children across from me at the breakfast table on Saturday mornings are doing the same thing. Crossing a distance, reaching the other side, carrying the weight of what they've learned about the world with more grace than I had any right to expect. The sun this August morning is enormous and yellow. Maisie is drawing the dog with a seriousness she brings to everything she loves. Owen is making the garden hose into a problem he can solve. Gordon is dreaming. I drink my coffee. I look at my children. I think, precisely this is what I was holding the whole time. I just needed the other things to fall away before I could see it clearly. The resolution of Daniel's story enacts what psychologists call post-traumatic growth. Not the absence of pain, but the genuine reorganization of identity and meaning that becomes possible only after catastrophic loss. His bridge metaphor, returned to here in the closing, has earned its resonance through the full arc of the narrative. It began as a gentle irony, the man who builds structures unable to see his own failing one. Transformed into something more painful, the engineer whose professional knowledge was useless against intimate betrayal, and arrives finally as genuine wisdom, the understanding that failure is information, that what a collapsed structure teaches you about load tolerance is precisely what allows you to build better. Psychologically, Daniel's most significant growth is his refusal to perform recovery. He names the rage, the grief, and the remaining ambiguity about his own role without collapsing them into easy resolution. This is emotional maturity in its truest form, the capacity to hold complexity without resolving it prematurely into a comfortable narrative. The children's trajectories are handled with particular precision. Owen's question, "Are you angry at Mom?" and his satisfied nod when Daniel answers honestly, then his immediate pivot to the dog walk. This is a child who needed a calibration, got one, and moved on. His emotional intelligence is greater than any adult in the story has credited. Maisie's recovery through drawing, now the dog instead of the family, represents the same impulse. Love redirected rather than extinguished. The final image is deliberately anticlimactic. No dramatic conclusion, no cathartic epiphany. A man at a kitchen table, children nearby, a dog dreaming ordinary light. This is the real answer to betrayal that the story has been building toward. Not triumph, not transformation into something unrecognizable, but the recovery of ordinary life. Its weight, its warmth, its specific, unrepeatable texture. That recovery, chosen and maintained under genuine pressure, is the most honest form of resilience the story can offer. Daniel's story, taken as a whole, is a study in the catastrophic cost of two people who stopped asking each other real questions. The marriage did not fail at the moment of infidelity. It failed at some earlier, quieter moment when the distance between them became comfortable enough to stop examining. Claire's affair was the symptom, visible and undeniable, of a deeper pathology. Two people who had allowed the architecture of shared life, the house, the children, the routines, to substitute for actual intimacy. What the story ultimately reveals is a fundamental truth about long-term relationships. The visible structures, marriage, home, family, are not evidence of the invisible ones: connection, honesty, desire. A bridge can look intact while the internal stress fractures accumulate. Daniel's professional metaphor is not just literary device. It is the story's genuine insight. He designed his marriage the way he might design a structure that looked right on paper without accounting for the specific, dynamic, living forces it would be subjected to over time. Claire, for her part, failed in a way that goes beyond the infidelity itself. She conducted an internal trial and reached a verdict without allowing the defendant to know they were being tried. Her choice to leave without the prior conversation was not just a cruelty. It was a denial of the marriage's agency. A declaration that the relationship did not warrant the difficult labor of honesty. The children are the story's moral center and its most sobering lesson. Maisie's observation about the painting, Owen's self-blame, his later careful measurement of his father's emotional state. These are the behaviors of children who have been required to become emotional adults before their time. This is infidelity's longest shadow. Not the damage to the partners, which time and effort can address, but the early, specific education in the fragility of love that the children receive and carry forward into their own futures. That Daniel understands this, and has spent 16 months prioritizing their stability over his own grief, is the story's truest moral achievement. The final question the story asks is not whether betrayal can be survived, it clearly can, but whether the person on the other side of survival is capable of converting loss into wisdom rather than bitterness. Daniel's answer, enacted rather than stated, is yes. Not easily, not without cost, not without residual complexity. But yes.